We at MD Coaches know that match is a stressful time. If your match results were not what you expected, you might need the time and the space to explore what's next. MD Coaches is proud to offer a comprehensive 6-week virtual group coaching program that explores your unique value and possibilities beyond the match. We're offering 4 separate rolling cohorts, Sundays, April 7 through May 12, or May 19 through June 23rd. A second option is Thursdays, May 2nd through June 6th, or June 13th through July 25th. All sessions begin at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register today at mdcoaches.store/medical-student-coaching.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians. To overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be, visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone. And don't forget that CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. My guest today is a prominent voice in the discussion of physician mental health, and she's also the author of a new book entitled If I Betray These Words, Moral Injury in Medicine, and Why It's So Hard for Clinicians to Put Patients First. I think it should be required reading for all healthcare professionals. So let's hear my conversation with the author, Dr. Wendy Dean. I am delighted to be talking today with Dr. Wendy Dean, who is speaking to us from Carlisle, Pennsylvania today. Wendy, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
It's such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We are going to talk about a lot of things. As we always do, Wendy, I want to explore the trajectory of your medical career, but I also want to spend a great deal of time talking about this incredible book that you have recently published. The title is If I Betray These Words, and there's a long subtitle after that I'm not going to try to repeat at this point because I don't have my notes in front of me. But it's just an amazing book. I got started on that thing when I was on a long trip to South America back in January, and just absolutely could not put it down. It is a brilliant piece of work, and I'm so excited to be able to talk to the author and hear some more about the insight that not only that you delivered in the book, but what you acquired while you were working on it. But as we always do, Wendy, I want to begin with your beginnings as it applies to how you got yourself into medicine. So was that a childhood dream for you or something that came along later?
Oh, it was. I was pretty young. I don't even remember. And my parents tell the story. We used to go to a cottage up on the Canadian border in Vermont. So it was about a 4-hour drive. And there were no cell phones. There was no video recorder.
The good old days.
Yeah, right. We actually had to talk to each other. and at one point, my parents, I guess, asked me when I was in about 4th grade what I wanted to do. And I just said, I want to be a doctor. Nobody in my family was in medicine. And apparently, as my mother told it, my father nearly drove off the road.
Oh, really?
Yep. It had no idea what to do with me. And I never wavered. It was that I just was on a straight path from there.
And for your dad, was it what a surprise, or was it how am I going to pay for all this, or what was
he had no intention
going on
of
in his
paying
head?
For it.
Pardon?
He had no intention of paying for it.
I see.
No, it was just, I think it was so incomprehensible to him. He had
see.
no idea where it might have come from or how one would get to that place of being
Yeah.
a doctor. So,
And what about for you? Do you have any idea where it came from?
I
Television dramas, or what do you think?
seriously, no idea. In fourth grade, I think, so in fourth grade, I was big into horses. And I think, as every young kid who gets involved with animals thinks, well, I want to be a vet. And I quickly realized that seeing ill or injured animals was not going to be so good for me because they couldn't tell me what was going on. And that was very anxiety provoking. But humans could, and people could. And
Yeah.
I think that seeing an ill or injured animal that can't understand either what's happening or what you're doing for them, for me was too hard. But at least with
Yeah.
people, they could understand that this may be uncomfortable, but it should make you better.
So by the time you had matriculated at Smith College and were working on your BA, you knew where you were headed.
Absolutely.
And then what was your major at that point? I noticed it's a BA.
Yes. Everybody who graduates from Smith gets a BA.
Oh, I see.
So I went into Smith very dead set. I was dead set on going to medical school. And I remember calling my mother and saying, "They have the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. That's so cool." I used to read it every week. Like, it was insane. But I also was incredibly curious. So I took all different kinds of classes. And and you're supposed to declare a major in your freshman or sophomore year, right? But
Generally speaking, yeah.
yep. So I got to my junior year and Smith sent out a very nice note to me that said, "Hey, by the way, you can't register for classes until you declare a major." The other good thing about Smith was that the college allowed you to create your own major. So what I did...
That's pretty cool.
Right? It was brilliant. So what that allowed me to do as a pre-med major, or as somebody heading towards medical school and being pre-med, I could combine a lot of those classes, a lot of the prerequisites, into my major, and then I didn't have to have my major requirements plus the pre-med requirements crowding out all of the other things I might be interested in. And so I put as many of the pre-med prerequisites into my major as I could, and I ended up with a psychology major with a neurophysiology focus, concentration.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds pretty strong to me.
It was very interesting, I have to say.
And I gather you had no trouble at all getting accepted to medical school?
Oh, yes, I did.
Oh, well, let's hear that story.
Oh, yes, I did.
I love these stories.
I would never get accepted to medical school now. And it wasn't that my grades were bad. I had terrible test anxiety for the MCATs. Mm-hmm. So I tanked my first set. And you could actually see me getting more and more comfortable with the exam as it went on. Because biology was the first section. It was terrible. That was my strength. And then chemistry was next, and then physics was next, and each of the scores got progressively higher. So I had to take them again, but then you had to average them. So it was just not easy. And I don't think I got a lot of rejections, and I flew all over the country, and it ended up being, I think I didn't get accepted until late April. And I distinctly remember when my mom called, because again, before internet, before email, they would send one letter to your college address and they would send one letter home. And my mom called just beside herself, excited. And she's like, I got a letter. Should I open it? I was like, yeah, I know, I got one too. And apparently I did not have the same response that she expected that I would. And she's like, well, did you open it? And I was like, yeah, I got accepted. And she's like, well, what? I said, I don't know that I want to go.
Oh, boy.
Because it had been such a brutal process getting accepted that I thought, hang on, if this is my entree into this world, what is it going to be like once I get there? But I went.
Well, I'm interested, what was your mom's response at that point?
She was just confused. I don't even remember, except that it was kind of incomprehensible to her that this thing I'd wanted since fourth grade was now in my hands, and I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore.
Do you think that had something to do with the accumulation of anxiety while you were going through the application process and that sort of thing, or was it just, I don't know, late teenage, unable to make a decision? What do you think?
It wasn't unable to make a decision. It was I wasn't on board with how the process had treated me or any of my fellow applicants.
I see. It had more to do with the admission process and the bureaucracy associated with it than what might be in your future. Is that right?
How we were treated as applicants and what that foretold for my future, what that potentially foretold for my future.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me about that feeling of how you were being treated at that point. I think this is really important, particularly for people that have never applied to medical school. But if you can recall where you were emotionally, I'd really like to hear some of that.
Senior year was brutal. Well, junior year, starting junior year. I didn't go away for spring break. I stayed on campus. I worked 2 campus jobs. I studied for MCATs the entire time. I had already made the decision that I couldn't go away for my junior year, so I couldn't spend junior year abroad because it would not have allowed me to finish my prerequisites and take the MCATs on schedule. So I had given that up. I gave up my spring break that year. I went into the first set of MCATs, and there was so much riding on it that I think the anxiety for me was just huge. Since fourth grade, I had been staking everything on this path. I got the results back. They were not great. They were not probably going to get me into the schools I wanted to go to. And when we went to talk to my pre-med advisor, it was a very, very disappointing conversation. It was basically like, well, you could always do something radically different. So I realized I was on my own with this battle. My parents didn't know anything about it. It made them anxious to talk about it, so that wasn't happening. My pre-med advisor had just proven themselves to be not my advocate. Yeah. And so I was in this on my own. I went back. I think I took the MCATs again in the fall, because it's not like now where you can take it like every month. It was in person in a room with 100 other people. Right. And I ended up doing much better the second time around. And then I started applying, and I started getting the expected rejections, the Harvard, the Yale. I didn't expect I would get into them, but I thought, what the heck? And then I had a very interesting experience where I had applied to an osteopathic school, and I got in. It was a brutal interview, it was very demeaning. And I got in, and they said, we need your deposit within 14 days, and it's non-refundable. And I thought, you're asking for $1,000. I'm paying for this myself, and I can't ever get it back. It just seemed a little bit extortionate. And I turned it down. I declined their offer. And so that was off the table. I didn't have a backup. Now I didn't have a backup. And by the way, my parents were clear that they were not supporting me in this nonsense. They would get me through college, but that was it. So, I kept interviewing. My car broke down for one of the interviews, so I didn't get there. And they were like, well, we don't have any more spots. It was just one of those, it felt like it was uphill the whole way. Yeah, a Sisyphean hill, I might add. Yeah. And so when I got to that point, this had been going on for a solid year. And I got there and I thought, okay, if this is what medical school is going to be like, not only is it going to be hard, but I'm alone in it and it's hard. Maybe this isn't the right thing. And then I tried to imagine what it would be like if I didn't at least try, right? If I didn't at least try to do it. And so I went.
Are you a doctor struggling to provide the best care for your patients while dealing with financial and caregiving matters out of the scope of your practice? Do you find yourself scrambling to keep up with the latest resources and wish there was an easier way? Then this virtual caregiver conference resource will save you time, money, and sanity by giving you all the resources and information your patients need in one place. This conference helps you and your patients enlist the best strategies around healthcare resources and the best financial steps for your patients while navigating caregiving situations. You don't have to go home feeling frustrated and helpless because you couldn't connect your patients with the best services. Find out more at jeanniedoherty.com or click in the link in the show's notes. You don't want to miss this caregiver resource.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians, for physicians, to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. Once you got through the door, was it immediately better, or were your anxieties, at least in terms of how you would be treated, dispelled? Did you begin to see some sunshine on the horizon?
Well,
what was your frame of mind at this point?
So everybody tells you that the first 2 years are brutal, and they were brutal. What I ended up doing, the way I ended up managing that, for me, I knew that just doing book learning for the first 2 years was not going to be where it was at. Mm-hmm. And so I very quickly found a mentor, and about, I don't know, twice a semester, I would call him up and say, hey, can I come to the OR? Can I come to the clinic? Like, I need to refocus on why I'm here, why biochemistry is relevant and why pharmacology is relevant. Like, I just need to get back to that clinical touch. He was great. It was always absolutely, here are my OR days, here are my clinic days, come on in.
That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a little surprised, I have to say, I'm a little surprised that the school didn't have that kind of experience built into the program, even during the basic science years.
Well, let's remember this was a while ago.
I understand.
And it was a very young school.
Ah, I see.
So I think UMass was only, I think it was maybe 20 years old. It was pretty young. So they were building in some sorts of pseudo-clinical exposure, like they were doing the physical exam. They were teaching us the physical exam. They were teaching us interviewing. But as far as just getting us into an established physician's office or clinic or OR, they hadn't done that yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. But then, again, next question is, finally you found yourself in clinical rotations. And at that point, did it finally look brighter? Did you feel like you were in the right place finally?
For sure.
Good.
Yeah. Let me put a caveat on that. My surgical rotations felt like that.
I'm so pleased.
The medicine rotations, maybe not so much.
And I think a lot of people are probably going to be surprised to hear that, because the surgeons, despite the fact that everybody knows that we're just the kindest people on earth, sometimes we get a bad rap.
Yeah.
But it sounds like they were good to you, and I'm really happy to hear that.
Oh, I don't know that they were good to me.
Okay, maybe I
put it that way.
expressed myself. Yeah.
There were some who were really good to me, and there were some who they matched the stereotype. And I'm sorry to say it was mostly the vascular surgeons who met that stereotype.
Yeah. No surprise there.
But it was the way felt comfortable to me. It was the way I thought about the world. It was the hands-on part of it I was good at. It seemed like a good fit for me.
Yeah. So how did you finally go about deciding what you were going to be when you grew up?
Yeah, well, I didn't take a straight path to that either. So
I think that's a good policy, by the way, but I want to hear the story.
It's getting harder and harder to do that.
I know.
I wanted to go into ortho, and, in the early 90s, a woman going into ortho, that was a tough road to hoe.
I bet it was.
And the rotations I was on, when I was doing rotations as a medical student, it was not a good experience. So as much as I loved the specialty, there's that anecdote where somebody can't decide what specialty they want to apply for residency in, and they say, well, take the journals, and whichever one you read on the plane is the one that you should do. There was never any question. It was the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery, right? That's what I preferred to read.
Yeah.
I just looked at it and I said, do I want to fight this sexist fight my entire career? Do I want to do that? Mm-hmm. And I decided that I didn't. So I went into general surgery. It was tough as a woman then to find a good mentor because there weren't women ahead of me. Mm-hmm. And again, it was one of those where it wasn't my passion. General surgery was not my passion. And I couldn't, as I looked at the life that I would have as an attending, I thought, this is not going to let me do anything else. And I have so many other interests outside of medicine. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make this work for my life. And it was that point where I just said, okay, maybe I'm not.
And what was the next step?
I was sort of exploring what this new thing called virtual reality was. And I was talking to companies out in California and thinking, well, I'm just going to cut the ties here and I'm going to leave medicine and go out and figure out what the Silicon Valley thing is and work with these startup companies. It seems really cool. It seems very creative. It seems like it could bring a lot of my interests together. And then I met my husband, who was committed to a neurosurgery program and in the Northeast, and I couldn't move to California. So I ended up going and working in ERs for a couple of years, which would not only give me an income, but it also let me see all of the other specialties that I hadn't maybe given short shrift to.
I gather there was an internship somewhere, perhaps a rotating internship.
I did a surgery internship.
Yeah.
This whole decision happened in my third year of my residency, my surgery residency.
Wow.
I had very interesting responses to it. One of the surgeons wouldn't talk to me. One of the other surgeons said that's a waste of an MD. It was not a very charitable, mentoring, sort of nurturing approach.
And I guess emergency medicine was still very much in its youthfulness at that point.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It was.
Yeah. And so how long did this go on? What happened next?
I worked in emergency rooms in very rural northern Vermont and New Hampshire for 2 years, and then went back to psychiatry residency and ended up finishing that and going out and practicing for a while.
Yeah. And how long were you in practice in psychiatry?
Just about a decade.
Yeah.
I ran the psychiatry emergency room at Rhode Island Hospital for a year, and then my husband, who had also left his residency, went back to radiology. He went from neurosurgery to radiology. And so I moved from that hospital job to a private practice when he moved, when he went back to residency.
Well, I know that there is quite a story, and we could likely talk about it for literally hours and hours. At least I could, because I find this very interesting. But there was clearly some territory to cover between practicing psychiatry and, number one, not only becoming an author, but identifying and shining a light on and getting into the process of exposure of what I think is the most threatening phenomenon to hang over the world of medical care ever. And that is this phenomenon of moral injury and how that turned into your book. And with that little prologue, I'm going to let you go ahead and start the conversation and tell me how we got into it. Week by week, I'm going to let you describe it in your own words.
That's great. I think, number one, writing a book was never on my bucket list. So people just need to, I think that background is sort of helpful. I was almost a reluctant author. But it started with me looking at my psychiatry practice and saying, you know what? I have a choice here. I can either turn my practice into a pill mill, into a prescription practice where people come in every 15 minutes and I see them briefly and send them on their way, which I think is great for some people. For me, it was not going to work. I liked the relationships with people. I liked helping them find insight in psychotherapy. I think it was very effective with some conditions like bipolar disorder to help people understand how to manage the illness, to have that close long-term relationship with them and to see the minute changes. And so I just didn't feel like it was the best for my patients for me to transition to that sort of practice. But if I didn't do that, it was very difficult to make ends meet. Mm-hmm. And so I decided I was going to leave the practice rather than changing to something that I didn't feel was best for my patients. Mm-hmm. And that was a crucial step.
I bet it was.
And it did two things. It made me really think about what was going on in my practice. But then when I went to work for the Army doing research funding oversight, I got to see clinicians across the country in all different systems, in all different kinds of specialties, in all different settings. And I started to notice patterns because I talked to them on a very regular basis. And I saw them probably twice a year in person when we were at conferences together. And so, when you're at a conference, there's the formal part of it and there's the informal out in the hallway or over dinner conversations that you have that are like, hey, how's work? How are the kids? How's it? And what I would hear was almost the same thing from everybody. I love my patients. I love the work I do. But there's so much more getting in between me and my patients that it's getting increasingly frustrating. That was a really eye-opening. And it was probably 4 or 5 years into that, I read about a physician who had died by suicide and the response of their organization and the response of the patients. And it made me think, I was deep into the stories about deaths by suicide of active duty military and veterans at that point. And I was seeing how the Army was responding to that. And I was wondering, I thought, well, okay, so number one, how many physicians die by suicide every year? And what are we doing about that? And when I did the back of the envelope calculation and compared active duty military and veterans to physicians, I realized that our rates of death by suicide were very similar, if not a little bit higher in civilian physicians, and that we weren't really doing a whole lot about it. And so that got me curious. And, this was all side of desk while I was managing regenerative medicine and hand and face transplant activities in the Army. As I got more curious about that, I started realizing, okay, so there's this thing called burnout. What are we doing about that? And the more I talked to people, the more I would say to them, so, okay, are you burned out? And they would say, I don't have better language for it, but it doesn't really land for me. I knew what I was signing up for. I was going to work long hours. I was going to see really hard things. I knew that. And I trained for a decade to be able to do that to the patient's best interest. And yet, when I go out into practice, the first thing I have to do is compromise that gold standard, because I have constraints from my organization. I have constraints from the insurer. I have constraints here, there, and everywhere. And that, to me, felt very different than burnout. That's not a demand-resource mismatch. That is a fundamental break in the promise that you make your patients when you go into this field. And so I started talking with Simon Talbot, who is a plastic surgeon at Brigham and Women's, and he was feeling the same way. And so we started sort of looking for new language. I think because I was working for the Army, I was sort of primed to hear what they were talking about. And I heard the story about moral injury. And the more I heard about that, the more I thought, okay, there's something to this.
Mm-hmm.
And, I started asking, can we generalize this to a civilian population? I think it's legitimate to do it. And I think the response of physicians and other healthcare professionals has been, yes, this is my language.
Well, it certainly, to me, is the most accurate identifier that I have encountered anywhere to talk about the way physicians and surgeons feel about their profession as compared to how they did almost a half century ago when I started. And kudos to you and your co-author for coming up with the language. Or did you guys come up with that language, or is it borrowed from someplace else? How'd that come about?
It's actually borrowed from the military. It was Jonathan Shea was a psychiatrist working with veterans from the Vietnam War. And he was the first one to conceptualize this. And because he was treating veterans who looked like they had PTSD, but who weren't getting better with the treatments that we knew worked for PTSD. And so as a good clinician, he's like, wait a minute, these people aren't getting better. I've tried multiple different modalities that I think should work, and they're not working. So maybe I should go and question my diagnosis. And when he did that, he realized that it wasn't a fear-based challenge. It was like a threat to their moral core. And that's what these folks were struggling with. They were struggling with betrayal by a legitimate authority in a high-stakes situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Brett Litz and his colleagues, also working with veterans, expanded it and said, it is perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, those deeply held moral beliefs are the oaths that we take to put our patients first. When those are threatened, that's where we start to really struggle.
The title of the book couldn't possibly be better, If I Betrayed These Words. You want to talk a little bit about exactly where that came from?
Yeah. So my publisher, Chip Fleischer at Steerforth Press, I could not have chosen a better, if I had handpicked or, said these are the criteria for a publisher, I could not have chosen better. I was not smart enough to have any of those criteria because this is a first book. But when he looked at the content, he said, okay, I think your idea is amazing, but you need help writing it. And so he gave me the tools I needed to be successful, right? Every single supervisor should be that. But he also never gave me any kind of deadline until the title. And so, I had been blithely writing a book without a title for, 15 months, 17 months, some absurd length of time. And he's like, okay, we need a title. And we need it now. And so I think we had 3 days to choose it. So for about 4 hours one day, my developmental editor and I tossed back and forth these titles, and nothing was working. It was just, none of it was right. And so that night, I sort of did what I usually do, and I dropped back and I said, okay, I need to read. What I was looking for was the do no harm line in the oath. And I kept searching and I couldn't find it. But what I did in the process was I read all of these oaths that various classes and groups take. And they all had sort of these similar themes. And it was gratitude towards teachers, a commitment to lifelong learning, an obligation to nurture others, to be selfless, to not take advantage of your patients. But I found this one translation of the Hippocratic Oath by Amelia Arenas in 2010. And if I can, I'd really like to read it because I think the whole thing put together.
Please do.
So the very end of it says, I pray that the attention I give to those who put themselves in my hands be rewarded with happiness. And in honor of the knowledge I've received from my teachers, I swear to care for anyone who suffers, prince or slave. If I ever break this oath, let my gods take away my knowledge of this art and my own health. Here speaks a citizen, a servant of people. May I be destroyed if I betray these words. And I had heard something so similar in so many people that I'd talked to, and they never used the "it's destroying me," but it was, "this is tearing me apart, this is grinding me to dust, this is killing me, it was variations on that theme. When I read that, I was like, okay, I'm done. This is my title. I'm done.
I mean, you just really nailed it. And what I find so incredibly insightful about this, whereas for a long time, I think a lot of what physicians were saying about what it was like for them to go to work every day sounded like whining, because there's so many hours and all that kind of stuff. Well, for crying out loud, that's been going on for centuries, And suddenly somebody comes along and notices that it's not so much because we are worn out, but we feel like we're somehow not accomplishing what we came to accomplish.
We're breaking our promise.
Yeah, that's a really bad feeling.
Yeah. You can work me as hard as you want, but don't get in my way of taking care of my patients.
And that has certainly been my experience with the vast majority of physicians that I have known. So the book is just an incredible examination of, I forget how many, I know it's at least a dozen and probably more individuals who faced exactly that reality of moral injury.
Yeah.
And did you include everyone that you explored? Did you have to pick from an even bigger pile and cut it down to a manageable group of stories that would really hold the audience? How did you decide what was going to go into the book?
So probably for every one of the stories I told, there are at least 4 or 5 that I couldn't tell. And I couldn't tell them for a variety of reasons. Either I didn't have all the details, or I didn't have permission, or as we started to explore it, it got too uncomfortable for the people who were telling me the story. Or they said from the outset, I think this is relevant, but I can't have it out. Mm-hmm. Or it was incredibly painful, but it was very hard. It got so deep into the weeds that it would have been too hard for people who weren't deeply familiar with medicine to understand it. And we were aiming for a lay audience for this because I think patients need to know about it too.
Absolutely. What was the effect on you hearing these stories from people who suffered?
You think that you're just going to do some research, you're going to write the research, you're going to do an interview, and you're going to catalog the interview, and you're going to weave them all together into a story. But what ended up happening was I carried those stories, right? And I would talk to the folks, and it was incredibly emotional, and we almost always had to have 3 or 4 conversations before I could get to the real meat of what was happening. I spoke to families who were devastated. I spoke to clinicians at various points in a devastating year. And I had to relive lots of painful points in my career and in my own personal life. And so I did not expect it. I was quite unprepared for what it was going to be like. Not that I would change it, but I carried a lot for a long time.
I don't want to put you in the position of being on the spot, but I wonder if you could pick 1 or even 2 of the stories that you gave us in the book that you found particularly powerful that you'd like to share for us. I know that's a tough one.
It's a really tough one, but there are 2, maybe 3. So the first one is a physician that I'm still in contact with, who was a hospitalist, loved nothing more than finding a really challenging case that nobody had been able to crack yet, and just sitting down and plowing through every bit of the patient's record to find that tiny little nugget or those 5 tiny little nuggets to strand together that would reveal what the real diagnosis was.
Mm-hmm.
That was everything she wanted to do. And because of the way reimbursement is working, the way hospital contracting is working, she found it more and more difficult to find a position where she could put her skills to the best use. And it has become harder and harder. And in fact, I just got a text the other day saying, you know what, I have to move on again. And this is a person who would be my first choice of somebody to take care of me in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And yet she cannot find a job in a hospital. So that was one of the stories I told very early on in the book, because she's somebody who wants nothing more than to work really hard and take really good care of her patients. And because of the corporatized structure of healthcare right now, she can't do that. And so that's somebody who's facing moral injury and has not yet found a solution. There were 2 others who I feel like had a different approach. Both of them had served in the military. They're unrelated, but both of them had served in the military, were working in the Midwest in different places. One of them had established a clinic, and the hospital sold the clinic and then said to her, and she had established the clinic within the hospital itself. So, it wasn't like they were stealing anything from her, but without her knowledge, they sold it to another company to run. And she also was being told that she couldn't refer patients outside of her hospital system. They wanted to keep the revenue within the system, even though she knew that there were experts she needed to access that were outside the system. And that happened to her twice in 2 years, and she quit 2 jobs in 2 years because she refused to have her values and what she felt was her moral position questioned.
Mm-hmm.
She left and went out on her own. I mean, that takes some serious courage.
Huge courage.
Right. But I thought it was a great example of, this is a physician who says, come hell or high water, I'm going to stand on this square and I'm not going to move. This is my ethical line and I'm not going to cross it. Now, this is a woman who had been in the military, had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, had taken care of had taken care of service members coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan in Landstuhl. So this woman knew hard, right? She knew she really knew hard.
Do we have a realistic hope somewhere? It's been literally half century since I began practice. And of course, at that time, when I started, there was just no argument. There was no pushback from hospital administrators about things that were directly related to what was best for the patient. The paradigm is totally different now. The number of physicians that are actually in private practice is less than the number of physicians who are employed. And the physicians who are employed find themselves being given rules to live by that are just outside the lines of acceptability for what's right for the patient. And that's kind of the norm nowadays. So the question that I'm struggling my way to ask you is it realistic to think that we are going to reach a point where we will be able to override corporate oversight of that sort that ignores the best interest of the patients, or which way is it going to go?
So it's part of the reason I wrote the book, because I think physicians and other licensee groups are seeing the same thing and are starting to clamor for different. But I think patients need to know it too. And I think once we can get clinicians and patients together, and then maybe employers who are the ones who choose the insurance plans that dictate some of this, if we can get a coalition of all of those together, we may be able to shift. I hope that we can shift back to a place where healthcare decisions are between a physician and a patient, or a clinician and a patient, rather than the administrator dictated choices that the clinician has. I think there are a lot of ways that we can go about doing that. They are not going to happen overnight, and physicians are quite impatient by nature because, we're used to walking into a room. We have a 15-minute appointment. we get the history, we make an assessment, we create a plan and write a prescription or make recommendations. We've solved a problem in 15 minutes. Right? The rest of the world does not have that luxury. And so I spend a lot of my time reminding people that just because the first answer is no, or maybe not, or whatever, doesn't mean that is the answer. And we need to be persistent, and we need to be in this for an ultra marathon, not a sprint. And we need to keep saying the same thing over and over again, and we need to be asking the same questions over and over again, and we need to bring our patients along with us. And we need to educate our legislators about why healthcare is different and what this is doing to us. Because although we take it for granted, how many people understand? I mean, my parents never understood what I did for work. Like, they did not understand it. I think it's true for a lot of people who've never been part of medicine. It's a very opaque sector. And so we have to be very intentional about explaining exactly what this is doing to us and why. And I'm a firm believer that we created healthcare the way it is now. We created this structure as it is now. That means that we can renovate it. We can make new decisions.
I like that attitude.
Right. But in order to do that, when you renovate a house, it's way easier if you have the original blueprints to go by. So that's part of the reason why I wrote the book the way I wrote it. I didn't tell you just what's happening now. I said, how did it get this way? How the heck did we get to this position? So that we can start understanding where we've been already, what we've tried already, and to make new decisions based on that information. So, I think the first place that we have to start as physicians is to start learning some of that and understanding. We've done a woefully inadequate job of preparing our young colleagues about the environment that they're coming out into and that they'll be expected to manage in. Information is power, and I think forewarned is forearmed. And so the more we can help them understand what the forces are and the pressures are that they will be facing when they come out and why they are that way, then they can start to work on changing it. I think one of the first places we need to start working is on reimbursement and on at the FTC level. And the good news is that, I don't know if you saw it, but last week on March 5th, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, the Department of Justice, and Health and Human Services put out a request for information asking for public comment on the impact of corporate greed in healthcare.
Wow.
Right.
I did not see that.
Yes. And I was like, oh, March 6th feels like Christmas to me.
Really? I like the sound of that.
Until May 6th, people can go and comment. What has the impact of corporate greed been on you? Whether you're an administrator, a physician, a nurse practitioner, a bedside nurse, or a patient, what has been the impact? Please go to that public comment. And I can send you the link to put in the show notes.
Yeah, let's do.
There's even
I'm definitely going to that party.
Yeah. And there's even an option to put in an anonymous comment because the FTC realizes how dangerous it is for healthcare workers to speak up.
Yep.
They also did.
They
also did a workshop on private equity in healthcare on that same day, on March 5th, and it was amazing. And both the recording and the transcript are available for people to review. Yeah. So I think there's hope. I think people are starting to realize that all is not well in healthcare. Like, this COVID was a perfect stress test. It did not cause the problems. I'm going to say that until I am blue in the face. COVID did not cause these problems.
Yep.
But it highlighted it. It put it into stark relief. We could not look away. We could not ignore it. And everybody in healthcare thought, okay, thank goodness, I will get through this, but it'll show us where all the cracks and the fissures are in healthcare, and then we'll fix them. And we are 4 years into this. We are 2 years past where the biggest crises were, and we have not fixed a single thing.
Yep.
So people are wearing out, they're getting fed up, and they are walking just when we're having a silver tsunami and we're going to need everybody that we can have.
Well, that's going to bring me to one final question that I just have to ask before I get out of the way and let you speak to my audience on your own. And that is this a uniquely American problem, or does it exist elsewhere as well?
Yeah, no. So this is not uniquely American. We have heard from folks in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Australia and New Zealand, Mexico.
Well, I think you've wrapped it up very nicely and put a beautiful bow on it. So, and I want to thank you for being here and taking the time, sharing your time so generously to talk about a really difficult problem. I've enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed the book. I wish I could find the words to tell people how important it is that they go out and read it, because it is unlike anything that I have ever run across in the discussion of healthcare management in America. That said, Wendy, I'm going to step aside for a moment, and we're going to do what we came here to do, an audience. This is Dr. Wendy Dean delivering her personal prescriptions for success.
That makes it sound so weighty. And probably promises it being more wise than it is. But so the things that I've made a lot of twists and turns in my career. This is not at all the career that I imagined I would have when I started out. Writing a book was never something I thought I would do. In fact, I told my husband that it was the last thing I should do. But what has gotten me to this point is a real commitment to what I think of as the 4 C's, and that is curiosity, coachability, compassion or the presumption of charity, and courage. And so, curiosity is that thing that keeps me running down rabbit holes day after day after day. It's the thing that keeps 25 tabs open on my laptop and makes my husband crazy. God bless him. He is a very patient soul. Coachability, that is a characteristic or a trait I cannot stress enough. And it requires a couple of things. It requires you being humble, being vulnerable, being open about learning new things, trying new things, looking foolish, all in the service of getting better and learning something new. But it doesn't mean that it has to only be about new things. I think it's something that is really, really important, even in a career that we've done for 30 years. Being willing to hear and sort of assimilate new knowledge and to change either your outlook or your behavior is critical. Compassion and presumption of charity, I think, just speaks for itself. People are trying their best. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt. And for me, courage comes in just every day we face hard things, right? And the more we can face them directly and not kind of slip out the side or avoid it or, shrink from a bit of conflict, to learn how to have conflict in an adult way, I think is really important. And it all kind of gets tied up in this phrase that I heard from the young adult author Jason Reynolds. And what he said was his mom told him when he was a kid, stand on your square and say the truth courageously. And I think about that so often. What is your square? What is that thing that you will stand on and stand for? And then speak for it. Have the courage of that conviction. It will make you a better person. It will make the world a better place. And it will help you sleep at night.
Well, Dr. Wendy Dean, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm very impressed with what you presented today, and I've already spoken about how impressed I am with the book, which I hope everybody that hears this podcast will go out and get themselves a copy, because it is just unlike anything that I have ever read when it comes to addressing this issue of how we deliver health care in the U.S. and how we treat the people who deliver it. It's very important stuff. Before we go, Wendy, I want to give you an opportunity to tell the audience where they can find you and where they can find your book and anything else you'd like to share.
Oh, thanks so much. So the easiest place to go is to fixmoralinjury.org, which is our website. You can find the book there. You can find our Moral Matters podcast. If you go to the contact form, that will come to me. So if you want to reach out and ask a question or have any thoughts or ideas, you can find me there. The one thing you can't find there is my new podcast. No, seriously, it's with Matt Ramsey, who's in chapter 1 in the book. It's called 43ccpodcast.com. You can find the information for that there.
Dr. Wendy Dean, thank you so much for being with us. It has been a pleasure.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening with us today. If you enjoyed the show, you can help us reach more listeners by leaving a rating and a review, especially on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And if your app doesn't have that option, just leave us an email or a voicemail through SpeakPipe at www.mymdcoaches.com/podcast. You can also help by becoming a Patreon member. That link is in the show notes. And we also hope that you'll follow our companion podcast, Life-Changing Moments with Dr. Dale Waxman. Special thanks to our producer, Craig Clausen, our promotions manager, Mariana Rodabaugh, and to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.